Do you need to pass GED Science? Well, if GED Science is standing in the way of you moving ahead in life, know that I'm here to help. I made this video to help you pass GED Science as fast as possible so you can move ahead to bigger and better things in life like college or a better job, whatever your goal happens to be. And we're getting started right now.
Living things are all made up of the basic unit of life, which we call cells. Each cell carries out essential life functions such as making specialized substances, reproduction, movement, growth, and maintenance of the cell. Animals and plants are multicellular, meaning that they have multiple different kinds of cells. Animals and plants have cells called eukaryotic cells. On the other hand, bacteria and protozoa are unicellular, which means that they are made up of only one cell. Bacteria have cells which are called prokaryotic cells. Every cell has a structure that keeps the cell's contents contained from the external environment, which is known as the cell membrane. Only small molecules such as carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen can diffuse freely through the cell membrane. Therefore, the cell membrane is said to be selectively permeable. Cytoplasm is a jelly-like substance found inside of the cell membrane. Prokaryotes, such as bacteria, have a cell wall, while both animal and plant cells are eukaryotic. Only plant cells have a cell wall. So in case you're on a device with a small screen, this diagram right here, this says eukaryote, and this says mitochondrion, ribosomes, cell membrane, membrane enclosed nucleus, nucleolus. This says prokaryote, this says nucleoid, this says capsule, some prokaryotes, this says flagellum, and this says cell wall, and in parentheses it says in some eukaryotes. So it says here, question 1 is based on the information in the passage above, which I just read, and the diagram, which is over here. And it says, a professor is studying a cell with a microscope. He can detect ribosomes, a cell wall, and a cell membrane. Which of the following types of cells could the sample be? A plant cell, B, an animal cell, C, a bacteria cell, or D, both A and C. So let's have you pause the video if you'd like to. Try this out. Take all the time you need. You might need to reread the passage or at least parts of it and refer to the diagram to answer the question. So let me give you a chance to try that now. All right, let's talk about this question here. So basically, the professor looks under a microscope and sees that the cell has ribosomes, a cell wall, and a cell membrane. And if we look over here at our diagram, it tells us that both eukaryotes and prokaryotes have ribosomes. It also tells us that both eukaryotes and prokaryotes are going to have a cell membrane. So the fact that he sees that his cell has both ribosomes and a cell membrane, all right, that is not all that helpful. Okay. But the cell wall component here is the thing that we want to kind of zero in on, because we see here that prokaryotes have a cell wall, and it tells us that in some eukaryotes you'll see a cell wall. Now, let's look at the last two sentences here because these are really important. It tells us prokaryotes such as bacteria have a cell wall. So, could the cell sample that the professor sees, could that be a bacterial cell? Well, why not? Because we know that bacterial cells are going to have ribosomes, a cell wall, and a cell membrane. And the sample that he sees has a cell wall, so it very well could be bacterial. Now, the last sentence tells us that when we look at both animal and plant cells, only plant cells will have the cell wall. When we just talk about plant and animal cells, again, only plant cells are going to have the cell wall. So, could the sample that he sees be an animal cell? Well, no, it couldn't, because we know that an animal cell is not going to have a cell wall, but a plant cell could. So, the sample that he's looking at, it could be a plant cell, or it could be a bacterial cell. All right, and we need more information to determine which it is, but just based off of what we're given, all right, it very well could be a plant cell or a bacterial cell. So D is the correct answer here.
Cells are the smallest unit of life. Tissues are groups of similar cells that together perform a specific function. Groups of tissues that carry out a function are called organs. Groups of organs that together perform a function are called organ systems. For example, consider the circulatory system. The key organ of the circulatory system is the heart. There should be a period here. The heart is a muscle that pumps blood through the vessels in the circulatory system. When the heart pumps blood, the blood goes through the arteries, then capillaries, then veins, then back to the heart again. The capillaries are sites of exchange. Another example of an organ system is the respiratory system. The main function of the respiratory system is to take in oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. Key organs of the respiratory system include the nose, throat, trachea, lungs. Which of the following is correct? An organ is larger than a cell, tissues are smaller than cells, organ systems are smaller than organs, or D, tissues are larger than organs. So if you'd like to, now would be the time to pause the video, try to figure this out, and then when you're ready, we'll go over how to do this question. So it's really these first few sentences here that give us the information that we need here, right? It tells us cells are the smallest unit of life, and then tissues are groups of similar cells, and then it tells us that groups of tissues are called organs, and groups of organs are called organ systems. So if we just kind of take the information from the first couple sentences, we can see the different components listed from smallest to largest, and I typed this out in blue for you. I just picked blue randomly just to make this information stand out, I guess, from the rest of the question. But basically, if we just go through these, right, D, tissues are larger than organs. Well, we can see from our list, once we've ordered things from smallest to largest, that organs are actually bigger than tissues, so D is out. C, organ systems are smaller than organs. Well, actually, organ systems appear further down on the list, so they are larger than organs. Tissues are smaller than cells. Well, that's also incorrect. So A is the right answer, and organ is larger than a cell. So A is correct here. Okay, so for this question, we've got the exact same passage here as we had from the last question. So all of this text here is exactly what I just read, so I won't read that again for the sake of time. Now, unfortunately, the text is kind of small on the screen, but it's really hard to fit longer passages on the screen, so I apologize if this text is kind of hard to read because it's small. So let me break this down and explain this, and then I'll give you a chance to try the question. It says, when you breathe in, you take in oxygen, O2, through your nose and into your lungs. From the lungs, the oxygen goes into a certain blood vessel, depicted in red below, and swaps with carbon dioxide, CO2, which you breathe out. Which blood vessel shown in red is the diagram most likely depicting? So let me explain this diagram because I know might be kind of small if you're on a phone or a small screen device. So it tells us that this blue structure here is the alveolus, which is the air sac of the lung. And we see this red structure right here, and that's really what you're being asked to figure out, is this red structure here, a vein, an artery, a capillary, or a throat. Now, we see a face here, right? So this is like a person's face, and basically the person, what this is showing is the person breathes in through their nose, and the oxygen goes down into the lung, or the air sac of the lung here, this blue structure, and then the oxygen is going to go into this red structure here. Now, we also see an arrow going from the red structure back into the lung, and then from the lung and out through the nose. All right, and this says CO2. All right, so basically it looks like here at this red structure, oxygen is coming in, CO2 is going out. All right, so tell me, this blood vessel right here, is this a vein, an artery, a capillary, or a throat? And you might have to reread this passage, or at least parts of it, and review the information on the screen to try to figure it out. So take your time with this, pause the video, try this one out, and then when you're ready, we'll go over it. And if you get stuck, don't worry. It's all about the learning right now. We don't care if you get the questions right or wrong. It's just practice to help you be better prepared for your test. Basically, it's asking which blood vessel is the diagram most likely depicting. So the throat is not a blood vessel, so we can take that out. Now, when we're dealing with vein, arteries, and capillaries, all right, what we have to understand is that the capillaries are sites of exchange. And what's happening here is that oxygen and CO2 are being swapped. That's what it tells us here. It says when you breathe in, you take in O2 through your nose and into your lungs. And from the lungs, the oxygen goes into this blood vessel here and swaps with CO2. So at the capillaries, there's oxygen and CO2 are being exchanged. So you breathe in that oxygen, it goes into the lung, into the capillary, in exchange for CO2 or carbon dioxide, which you breathe back out through your nose. It's very simply put. Okay. So this is not a vein or an artery, it's a capillary, and you don't really have to know anything about the body or how the body works to get this right. All right, this is just simply, hopefully, a matter of understanding that the veins, arteries, and capillaries here, we need to know that capillaries are sites of exchange. And what we see here, this word swaps is kind of a clue here too. we see that, CO2 and oxygen are being swapped. In other words, CO2 and oxygen are being exchanged at this red structure right here. Well, capillaries are sites of exchange, so therefore C must be a capillary, all right? Hopefully that makes sense here. Like I said, whether you got this right or wrong, we don't care right now. It's all about the learning and the knowledge to help you better prepare for your test. So this first champion shoutout goes to a test taker who unfortunately has been having some trouble with math, as many people do. And the test taker has taken math 7 times and has still had trouble passing. Now, a lot of people after failing 1 time feel very demoralized and discouraged, which is understandable here. But I think one of the test taker's strengths here is perseverance, because after 7 times, Crystal is still not giving up, and I want to applaud Crystal's perseverance here and also wish Crystal the best of luck, and hopefully we can get her over the edge here to finally pass that math section. Now, this next champion shoutout goes to a test taker who just passed the GED and says, quote, "I'm over the moon. It is such an amazing feeling. To anyone reading this, you've got this. I had thought about giving up many times, but I didn't, and I kept going." So hopefully this champion shoutout is a source of inspiration for those who have thought of giving up, but are still sticking with it. Okay, so this question is still using this passage here, and I'm not going to reread it again for the sake of time, but you're more than welcome to pause the video and study this passage. In fact, you'll probably need to do that to get the question right. But the question is now asking, which blood vessel carries blood away from the heart? Is it A, the arteries? Is it B, the capillaries? Is it C, the veins? Or is it D, the lungs? So let's have you pause the video if you want to. Try to figure this out. And when you're ready, we'll go over how to do it. Okay, so basically, a lot of these questions are about, reading what the question's asking you to do and just kind of scanning back through the passage to kind of find the parts that might be relevant. So right here, it's talking about the heart pumping blood, and it basically tells us, right, here's kind of the path. So H stands for heart, right? So it says the heart pumps blood, the blood goes through the arteries. So from the heart, the blood is going to go to the arteries, and then the capillaries. All right, and for arteries, I'm just going to put A. For capillaries, I'm just going to put C. So it tells us then the veins. All right. And then where does it go after the veins? It says from the veins, it goes back to the heart again. Okay, so simply put here, this is the path of blood once it leaves the heart. All right. It goes from the heart to the arteries. So the arteries carry blood away from the heart, the capillaries to the veins, and the veins bring it back to the heart. All right, so one way to remember that is also that, the arteries have an A in them. A and away have the same first letter. The arteries carry the blood away from the heart. All right, but the answer here is A, so hopefully that makes sense. Mitosis and meiosis are both types of cell division. Mitosis produces 2 genetically identical daughter cells, each with an identical number of chromosomes as the parent cell. Meiosis produces 4 genetically unique cells, each with half the number of chromosomes as the parent cell. Which of the following types of cell division does the diagram above depict? Is it A, mitosis, or B, meiosis? So now would be a good time to pause the video if you'd like to. Try this question out, and then when you're ready, we'll talk about how to do it. Okay, so it tells us here, really, that mitosis produces 2 genetically identical daughter cells. And each are going to have an identical number of chromosomes as the parent cell. So this here is our parent cell. And the end result of this process is going to be the 2 cells that we see right here. And what we notice here is that these, first of all, that there are 2 cells produced, 1, 2, and they look exactly identical to the parent cell. They're exactly the same as the parent cell. All right, now in meiosis, there would be 4 unique cells, and each of them would have half the number of chromosomes as the parent cell. So if this were meiosis, we wouldn't just see 2, we'd see 4 cells, as the paragraph here tells us, and we would also see that each of them, they're all going to look different from that parent cell, because it tells us each have half the number of chromosomes as the parent cell, so they're 4 genetically unique cells in meiosis. These are 2 cells that are produced, and they're genetically identical to the parent cell. And we can see that just by looking. We've got a red and a blue, a red and a blue. The parent cell has a red and a blue. Well, hey, this must be an example of mitosis. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense here. Suppose a forest fire destroyed hundreds of acres of forest in Brentville County. Abigail is the director of the Brentville County Forest Commission and is tasked with determining how to grow new trees to replace those of the damaged forest as soon as possible. Before the fire, the forest consisted mostly of native deciduous hardwoods. In developing her plan, Abigail discovers a research study which suggests that planting fast-growing exotic conifers may be a quicker way to regrow trees than planting hardwoods. Abigail also comes across a research study which demonstrates that conifer-eating insects such as caterpillars can damage conifer trees, but that increasing the songbird population may keep the caterpillar population under control. Which of the following is the best solution for Abigail to take to regrow the trees of the burned forest as fast as possible based on the research she studied? Is it A, plant conifer trees and limit the number of songbird nest boxes in the young forest? B, plant hardwoods and add more songbird nests to the young forest? C, plant conifer trees and add more songbird nests to the young forest? Or is it D, plant hardwoods and limit the number of songbird nests in the young forest? So let's have you pause the video, think about this question, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer here. She basically is developing a plan here to regrow the forest and regrow trees as fast as she can. She has two main decisions to make for her plan. The first is which type of trees should she plant, the conifers or the hardwoods. So right here it tells us that she comes across a research study which suggests that planting fast-growing exotic conifers may be a quicker way to regrow trees than planting hardwoods. All right, so assuming that cost is not an issue here, and assuming that we don't care if people are going to complain that the forest has been regrown with a different type of tree, if we're just looking at speed here, all right, if we have research that suggests that planting the conifers is probably going to be faster, then she's going to want to go with the conifers over the hardwoods. So B and D we can rule out. So again, when choosing between the two types of trees, if speed is the only factor here, all right, the faster option is most likely going to be the conifers based off of that research study. So the second decision she has to make is should she limit the number of songbird nests or put more songbird nests in the young forest? Well, if we look at the last sentence here, it tells us that she came across another research study which tells us that conifer-eating insects like caterpillars can damage conifer trees. So if we're planting a forest with mainly conifer trees and insects can damage those trees, obviously the damage to the trees is going to be bad for growth. So we want to avoid damage or at least minimize it as much as we can. And it tells us that increasing the songbird population may keep the caterpillar population under control. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that if there's more songbirds, the songbirds are probably going to eat more caterpillars. If they eat more caterpillars, there's less caterpillars out there to damage those conifer trees. I know, right? Poor caterpillars. So basically, if we limit the number of songbird nests in the forest versus adding more, all right, we have to make the assumption here that adding more songbird nests to the forest is going to help the songbird population thrive. And if we have a thriving songbird population, that unfortunately means that we're probably going to have fewer caterpillars around because the songbirds are going to eat those caterpillars, right? So again, poor caterpillars. But the answer to this question here is C. Plant more conifer trees, add more songbird nest boxes to the young forest. So just when you thought we were done talking about caterpillars, here's another question with caterpillars. A small forest ecosystem includes caterpillars, songbirds, bobcats, and coyotes. It says, based on this simplified food web, what would most likely happen if the bobcat population increased? A. The caterpillar population would decrease. B. The songbird population would increase. C. The songbird population would decrease. Or D. The coyote population would increase. So let's have you pause the video, try to figure this question out, and then when you're ready, we'll go over how to do it. All right, let's talk about this question here. So we see here we have a picture of a caterpillar, a songbird, a coyote, and a bobcat. Well, it's not really a bobcat. This is actually the channel mascot here, Tommy the cat, who is my pet cat.
You know how Nintendo has Mario, Donkey Kong, and Link from The Legend of Zelda, and PlayStation has Crash and Spyro, or at least they used to. I guess that was a really long time ago now. I don't know if they still have Crash and Spyro, but anyway, the channel mascot here is Tommy the cat, and in his mind, I'm pretty sure he views himself as a bobcat, although he's really the most indoor cat you'll ever see. The closest he ever gets to birds is watching them through the window, but since in his mind, I'm pretty sure he thinks he's a bobcat, that's why we have a photo of Tommy the cat here in this question. So basically, what we have to think about here is if we increase the bobcat population, all right, how is that going to affect the other populations? So the idea with any food web question is the arrows always point up the hierarchy. All right, so in other words, the arrows point towards the animal that's higher up in the food chain. All right, so some people get confused sometimes when they see this, and they would say, well, here's a caterpillar and the arrow is pointing towards the bird, so the caterpillar must eat the bird. But just note that that's not how you want to interpret a food web diagram like this. The arrows are going to be pointing towards the animal that's higher up in the food chain. Okay. And on practice test questions put out by the GED testing service, this is how they show it with the arrows pointing towards the animal higher in the food chain. So just know that you want to keep this in mind for your test here. All right, so that's the first thing to know about interpreting a diagram here. And the second thing is you have to think, if the bobcat population is increased, all right, and the bobcats, there's more of them, so they're going to eat more songbirds. And if the songbirds eat the caterpillars, but we have fewer songbirds, the caterpillar population it's not going to decrease. If anything, it's going to increase because there's less songbirds to prey on the caterpillars. All right, so the caterpillars get a break in answer choice A. What about B here? The songbird population would increase. Well, if the bobcats eat the songbirds and we're increasing the number of bobcats, logically, more songbirds will be eaten by the bobcats. So B is not correct here because we would expect the songbird population to decrease, which is why C is the correct answer. But not so fast. Before we go on to the next question here, why is D wrong? All right, this is an important concept to understand here. Okay, if at the top of our hierarchy here in our small forest ecosystem, we've got bobcats and coyotes. They're at the same level of the hierarchy, so that means that they are going to be in competition for food. So essentially, if there are less bobcats, that means there's more food for the coyotes. And if there are more bobcats, that means that the coyotes are going to have to compete more and more with the bobcats for food. So more bobcats is going to mean probably fewer coyotes because there's going to be more competition for food. If it's harder for the coyotes to find food, more of them are going to starve, and unfortunately, they're not going to make it. So the coyote population would decrease. All right, so here we're picking on the coyotes more so than the caterpillars. So the answer is C. The songbird population would decrease. So if you have trouble with this question, don't worry. These can be kind of tricky. So here's another variation of the question. This time it says, based on the simplified food web, what would most likely happen if the caterpillar population decreased? A, the songbird population would increase. B, the coyote population would increase. C, the songbird population would decrease. Or D, the bobcat population would increase. So now would be a good time to pause the video, try to figure this out, and then when you're ready, as always, we'll go over the question. Okay, so basically, we want to think about what would happen if the caterpillar population decreased. So let's go one by one here. So answer choice A. The songbird population would increase. Well, according to our food web, the songbirds are higher in the food chain than caterpillars. So the songbirds are going to eat caterpillars. So if there are fewer caterpillars, that means the songbirds are going to have less food. And if the songbirds have less food, unfortunately, more of the songbirds are going to starve and they're not going to make it. All right? So tragically, the songbird population would decrease if there are fewer caterpillars. B, the coyote population would increase. All right, so let's think about this now. If there were fewer caterpillars, that's less food for the songbirds. All right, so more songbirds are going to die out, tragically, for the songbird population. And if the coyotes eat the songbirds, but there are fewer songbirds, that means there's also going to be fewer coyotes. All right, so B is also not correct here. So what about C? The songbird population would decrease. All right, well, we've already said that if the songbirds eat the caterpillars and there are fewer caterpillars, songbirds don't get as much food. So some of the songbirds aren't going to find food and they are tragically they're not going to make it. They're going to die. And so therefore the songbird population would decrease. All right. But before we move to the next question, why is D wrong? So think about it. All right. Why would D be wrong? Why would the bobcat population increase or would it increase? Well, it would actually decrease here. All right. Again, if there's fewer caterpillars, more songbirds are going to die out, which means there's fewer food left over for the bobcat. So in this case, the bobcat population would also decrease. All right. So I know this might seem kind of complicated if this is one of the first times you've seen a food web question, but the best way to do this is just practice like you're doing right now. Just kind of practice reasoning your way through the questions and you'll get it. So the answer here was C, by the way.
So I actually have a video of a real coyote that I took when I lived in Minneapolis, and this was not off in the remote woods somewhere. This was actually in the city park in Minneapolis where I encountered this coyote, which is pretty cool.
So the next question says, the data in the table below represents the highest daily temperature in the make-believe Championsland measured over a 4-day period. And we see 92, 87, 91, and 86. And these temperatures are in degrees Fahrenheit. And the question says, what was the mean temperature over the 4-day period measured in degrees Celsius? You may use a calculator. So now would be a good time to pause the video. This is an important question for several reasons. Let's see how you do with this question. No pressure to get it right or wrong. I just want to see how you do, and then we will take it from there. Okay, so the first approach to this question, the first thing I want you to do, and I guess there's multiple ways to approach this, but the way I am going to look at it here is to start by finding the mean. Okay, so we want to find the mean, you want to add up all of the numbers in the data set, and then you're going to count up how many numbers there are total in that data set, and you're going to divide by that number. All right, so in other words, I'm going to add up all the numbers in the data set, and I'm going to divide by the total number of numbers. And if you're wondering, total number of numbers, what in the world does that mean? Let me show you. So note here how this is our data set. All right, so I've taken each of these numbers, 92, 87, 91, and 86, and I'm going to add them all up. And I'm going to count how many numbers there are total. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, because there's 4 different days. And I'm going to divide by 4. Okay, and so in my calculator, if I do 92 plus 87 plus 91 plus 86 and divide by 4, the mean comes out to be 89. Now, maybe you got 89 as the right answer, and you stopped there, and you thought that you had the right answer. And so if you got this far into the question, know that you did a really, really good job by calculating the mean. So if you got to 89, you calculated the mean correctly, but the problem is that we are in degrees Fahrenheit right now. All right, so if you made it this far, really good job with the first step, but we need to go another step here. All right, and if you didn't make it this far, hopefully now you see how to calculate the mean, because it is important for the test. The mean just means the average, and again, all you do is you just add up all of the numbers in the data set, and then count up how many numbers there are, and that's the number that you divide by. All right, and the next step, though, is we want to convert this into degrees Celsius. And they've given us this formula here, and so you'll be given the formula for temperature conversions on GED Science if this comes up. But there's kind of a speedrunner's way to do the calculation that's a lot faster, which I'll show you after we do it this way. But basically, you don't have to memorize this formula, but if you want to do it the speedrun way, which I'll show you how to do in a second, then you will have to memorize something. But basically, what I want to do is take this 89 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I'm going to come down to this formula here, and where it says T in degrees Fahrenheit, I replaced that with 89. All right, so all I've done right now, I'm trying to find the temperature in degrees Celsius, and all I've done is I took where it says temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, and I replaced that with 89. Then I'm going to subtract 32. All right, so 89 minus 32,
Okay, and then we're going to multiply it by 5 and divide by 9. All right, and the answer is 31 point, we can round it to 31.67. And I don't really care how you round it. I just want you to get this. If you got this number or something very close to it, if you round it differently, then consider that you got the right answer. So if you got this right, really, really good job. All right, and if you didn't get it right, then don't worry, at least you tried. Hopefully you learned something. All right, so this is how you would do the calculation using the formula. Now let me show you the faster kind of speed run way to do it. Okay, so to speed run temperature questions, you would have to memorize these 2 bullet points. Now, if you're thinking, well, I have so much to know for the GED, I don't think I can memorize these 2 points, it's just going to confuse me even more, then don't worry about it, but let me explain this to you anyway if you want to memorize these 2 points, just so that you can speed run these questions if you get it on the test. So let's say that you had to start with 31.67 in degrees Celsius, and you were told to convert that to Fahrenheit. All right, so using the speed run version here, what you would do, it just tells you to go from degrees Celsius to degrees Fahrenheit, multiply degrees Celsius by 1.8 and add 32. So my degrees Celsius is 31.67, so I would multiply that by 1.8 and I would add 32. And that will give me 89. And you can check that in your calculator if you don't believe me. So how do we go back from 89 degrees Fahrenheit? How do we convert that into degrees Celsius? Well, if you're starting from degrees Fahrenheit, like the second bullet point says, you're simply going to subtract 32 from degrees Fahrenheit, and then you're going to divide by 1.8. So let's do that. 89 minus 32 equals 57. And let's divide 57 by 1.8. And it should get me this magical number here, 31.67. So in my calculator, I get exactly that, 31.67. All right, and so like I said, if you don't want to memorize these 2 bullet points, that's fine, because if you get a temperature conversion question, they'll just give you the formula to do it. And so, if you want to just plug the number into your formula, it doesn't really take that much longer. All right, but if you just memorize these 2 bullet points, you don't have to mess around with that formula. All right, you'll just know, hey, I need to go from C to F, so I multiply degrees C by 1.8 and add 32. And if you have to go from F to C, you just subtract 32 from degrees F, then divide by 1.8. All right, so hopefully this is helpful. Wouldn't it be great if Championsland was a real place with an amusement park and resort that everyone got to go to for free once they passed the GED?
So your next question, is the following chemical equation balanced? We have C5H12 plus O2 yields 5CO2 plus H2O, and I'd like you to try to figure out if this is an example of a balanced chemical equation, yes or no. And if you have no idea how to do this, don't worry about it. That's what we're here to learn. So let's have you pause the video, try this out if you want to, and then we'll go over how to do it. Okay, so basically when we see a chemical equation like this, all right, the substances that are on the left-hand side of the equation over here are called the reactants, and this arrow means yields. And over here, this is called the products, all right, 5CO2 plus H2O. So we would say C5H12 reacts with O2 to yield 5CO2 and H2O, all right? But the most important thing is to be able to determine if this is balanced or not. So when I say the left-hand side of the equation, I'm really talking about everything to the left of this arrow here. Okay, so everything on this side. So let me write here LHS. LHS stands for left-hand side of the equation, all right? So we've got carbons, we've got hydrogens, and we've got oxygens. And you don't have to know what these stand for the GED, all right? You can just think of these as we've got C's, we've got H's, and we've got O's. So all we're going to do here is we're just going to count these up, and we're going to see if they match. We're just going to count these up, and we're going to see if the number on the left-hand side matches the number on the right-hand side. All right, that's all we're doing. So it looks like if we look at the carbon, we see this little number down here. That tells us that we've got 5 C's, all right? So for the H's, right beside the H's, we see 12, so we've got 12 H's. Now, if we look at our O's, This little number down here tells us that we have 2 O's. All right, and that's simple enough for the left-hand side. So now we're just going to take stock of what we have over here on the right-hand side, and we're going to see if the numbers all match up. And if they match up, we'll say that this is balanced, and if they don't match up, then not balanced. So RHS just stands for right-hand side. So let's start with our carbons. So in this case, we see that we've got a 5 out here. All right, so we have to apply this 5 to the carbon. So we have 5 C's on the right-hand side. All right, so now let's go down here and let's skip to the oxygens. So we see over here that we've got O2, but we also have to take this 5 into consideration, all right? So 5 times 2 is 10. So we have 10 oxygens here. But we also have to consider this 1 oxygen out here. All right, so 10 plus 1 out here is 11. So already we see that this is not balanced, but let's finish it out here. So for our H's, we just look at this little number down here and we see that we have 2. Okay. So this is not an example of a balanced chemical equation, so the answer to this is B. No. Okay, so now we have that same chemical equation right here, and this time what I would like you to do is try to balance this. And we don't have multiple choice answers here, so I'd just like you to try to work the problem out and try to come up with the answer on your own. And if you have no idea how to do this, or if you get stuck, don't worry, don't stress out about it. Just give this one a shot, and either way, right or wrong, we're just going to go over it and I'll explain how to do it. So now would be a good time to pause the video and give it a try. Okay, so let's talk about this question here. So when we're balancing, the most important thing to know is what you can and cannot change. So the numbers out front here, these numbers are called coefficients. And if we don't see a coefficient, we just say that it's 1. So for this H2O here, we would just say that the coefficient here is 1. Same with this O2, we would just say that the coefficient here is 1 because we don't see a coefficient, all right? And the thing here is that these coefficients, we can change them, but these little numbers here that are called subscripts, we can't change those, all right? So when you're balancing, just remember that you cannot change these little numbers here, all right? So don't try to change those little numbers. It's the numbers out front that you want to change when you're balancing. So that's really the most important thing to know about balancing, all right, before we even jump into the question. All right, you have to kind of understand the rules of the game, and the rules are that the coefficients out front here, you can change. These little numbers here called subscripts, you can't change those. And I don't care if you remember that these are called coefficients and these are called subscripts. Just remember the numbers out front, you can change. The little numbers here, you can't change. So now that we're clear on that here, all right, where I'm going to start is I see that we have 12 hydrogens on the left-hand side and only 2 on the right-hand side. So this H2O here, I'm going to start by changing this. So if I have 2 and I want to get to 12, well, 2 times 6 is 12. So if I put a 6 right here, 6 times 2 is 12. So I'm going to stick a 1 here. So that will give me 12 hydrogens if I put the 6 here. So now if we look, the number of hydrogens are balanced up on each side of the equation, which is good. But there's also this oxygen here. So we now have to see, by putting this 6 here, how does it change the number of oxygens? All right, so let's recount. So we see here we've got 5 times 2 is 10 oxygens, so that's not changed. And here we do 6 times 1, which is just 6, and we add these up. All right, so 10 plus 6 is 16. All right, so we have 16 oxygens on the right-hand side. So again, all I did to count that up was I looked at the 5 CO2, and I said, well, there's 10 oxygens because it's 5 times 2. Then I looked at the 6 H2O, and I said, well, now that we have a 6 here, 6 times 1 is 6. And you add that up, 10 plus 6 gives me 16, all right? So our oxygens are now unbalanced. So what I have to do is I'm going to look at the oxygen on the left-hand side here, and I'm going to stick an 8 here. And if I stick an 8 out in front, 8 times 2 is 16, all right? So now this is balanced up, all right? So when we count everything here, we see the carbons are both 5s, we see our H's are 12s, and our O's both are 16, which is perfect. All right, so this is a perfectly balanced chemical equation right here. So if you got this answer, you did really, really good job. If you didn't, don't worry about it. Good job for trying. Good effort. Just by making it this far into the video, you're doing a really, really good job. So either way, I hope that this was a learning experience on balancing.
Habituation involves stopping a response to an environmental stimulus if that stimulus is no longer perceived as a threat. Bald eagles are natural predators to rainbow trout. Holding underneath cover is one strategy adopted by rainbow trout to avoid bald eagles. 2 researchers placed a taxidermic mount of a bald eagle near a group of 8 hatchery-raised rainbow trout, which were reared under overhead cover. The experiment was conducted in an arena in which 1/3 of the arena had overhead cover, and the other 2/3 of the arena was not covered. The researchers hypothesized that the rainbow trout will habituate to the eagle's presence by the end of the 60-minute time period. The experiment was conducted over a 60-minute period. At the start of the time period, the average number of trout holding underneath cover was 7. By the end of the 60-minute period, the number of trout holding underneath cover was 3. Which of the following is correct? A. The results of the experiment support the hypothesis, or B. The results of the experiment do not support the hypothesis, or C. More rainbow trout were holding underneath cover at the end of the 60-minute period than at the start, or D. Fewer rainbow trout were holding underneath cover at the beginning of the 60-minute period than at the end. So let's have you pause the video here, try to figure this out, and then when you're ready, we'll go over how to answer the question. Okay, here. So with any question like this, it never hurts to just make sure that you understand what's happening. So basically, we've got bald eagles and we've got rainbow trout. And the eagles want to eat the trout, and the trout obviously want to avoid being eaten. So if we picture like a stream or a creek just out in nature, okay, let's say that maybe part of the creek has trees on both sides, and this actually, I don't know what this looks like, but let's just say that this part of the creek has trees. All right, and there's tree limbs and stuff hanging overneath the creek. All right, versus this part of the creek right here, where we don't see any trees on either side. All right, and so having these limbs and tree branches overhead on top of the creek, that's going to make it harder for the bald eagles to swoop in and snatch up the trout for lunch. All right, but over here in this part of the creek, right here, we don't see any overhead cover. So if the trout are just swimming around over here, all right, it's a lot easier for the bald eagles to kind of swoop in and have the trout for a snack. All right, so poor trout in this case. So that's what they're doing here in this experiment. But this time they've got an arena, or I don't know how they did it. If it's some kind of tank or whatever, but let's just picture it like this. They've got an arena here, and part of that arena, 1/3, has cover on top of it. So I don't know. Maybe they have like a tunnel. No idea how, but they have basically some kind of arena, and there is some kind of overhead structure, which this scribbles are going to represent the overhead portion. And then the majority of the tank, the other 2/3 of the tank, does not have any overhead cover. All right, and so what they did was they took an eagle statue, right? They took a bald eagle that's stuffed, and obviously it's not a real live eagle, but the trout they're not going to know that. They're just going to look at it and think it's a real eagle, or at least at the start of the experiment. So we've got an eagle out here, and so we've got trout swimming around in here. Now this is probably the world's worst drawing of a fish. Okay, but let's say that this is a fish. All right, so the fish can choose to spend time either underneath the portion that has a roof over the head, or it can spend time just swimming right out here out in the open. And the idea is that they put this eagle statue right here. And the idea is that, at first, the fish are going to think it's a real eagle, and they're going to be scared, and they're going to spend their time underneath the structure that has a roof over the head, or the section that has the cover, which makes it harder for the eagle to swoop in. All right, but by the end of the 60-minute period, the trout are going to wise up and realize, hey, this eagle is not posing a threat to us. There's no threat here, so if we come out in the open, there's not going to be any threat of attack, so why not just swim out in the open? And that's the idea of habituation. It's stopping a response to an environmental stimulus if that stimulus is no longer perceived as a threat. Right, so in other words, again, at the beginning of that experiment, the trout can choose to be under the cover or out in the open.
they see the eagle, and that's the stimulus to avoid being eaten. They see the eagle, they don't want to be eaten, so it essentially triggers them to go and hide underneath the cover. But then after a while, they realize that, hey, this is an eagle, it's stuffed, it's not trying to kill us, it's not trying to eat us, so maybe it's safe to come and venture out underneath, right out in the open here. All right, and that's what habituation is all about. It's stopping a response to an environmental stimulus if it's no longer perceived as a threat. So they see the eagle, they go underneath the cover, they realize, hey, the eagle's not a threat, so they stop going underneath the cover, at least not as much. All right, and so the hypothesis here is that the hypothesis is really just another big fancy word for an educated guess. So the researchers, before they did the actual experiment, they made the guess that the rainbow trout will habituate to the eagle's presence by the end of the 60-minute period. And that's exactly what we see here, right? The experiment was conducted over 60 minutes. And at the start, right, at the beginning, the average number of trout underneath the cover was 7. All right, but then at the end of that 60-minute period, the number under the cover was 3, meaning that 5 of the 7 trout were just swimming around out in the open. And the results of the experiment do support the hypothesis here, all right? So C and D are incorrect here, right? It says in C, more rainbow trout were holding underneath cover at the end of the 60-minute period than at the start. And that's not what the results show. The results show that there were 7 under cover at the beginning and only 3 at the end. All right, and D is also wrong because it says fewer trout were holding undercover at the beginning than at the end. Well, that's also wrong because there were 7 undercover at the beginning, and by the end there were 3. Okay, so we can eliminate C and D, and in this case, yes, the results do support the hypothesis, right? Because we can assume here that at the beginning of the experiment, there were more underneath the cover, but then they habituated to the eagle's presence. In other words, they realized, hey, this eagle is not a threat. So they stopped swimming under the cover, or at least the majority of them did. So A is the correct answer here.
Okay, so your next question says, a gardener wants to determine the likelihood of the stem length of the offspring of 2 plants he is planning to cross. The gardener knows that each plant has 2 alleles for stem length. The alleles are characterized by letters in the form of a genotype. One plant has a genotype of big L little l with long stem length, and the other plant has a genotype little l with short stem length. The offspring will inherit 1 allele from each parent plant. Question, what are the possible genotypes of the offspring? A, 25% big L little l, 75% little l, B, 100% big L little l, C, 100% little l, or D, 50% big L little l, and 50% little l. Okay, so let me give you a chance to try this out. So if you'd like to, you can pause the video, try this one out, and then when you're ready, we'll go over it. So this is an example of a Punnett square question, and these can be kind of confusing sometimes, and I can understand why, but hopefully after you see this example and maybe a couple other examples as you do your studying, hopefully you'll feel more confident that you can get these right. So basically, we're talking about plants here, so let's kind of try to translate this into human terms here, all right? And let's just put this in very simple terms here. Basically, what's going on here is we've got a gardener, and he's got a mom plant and a dad plant, and he's going to cross them to make baby plants, all right? I don't know if that's the proper terminology to use for plants or not, but that's basically what's going on here. So these are just kind of fancy words describing a mom plant and a dad plant. The guy crosses them to produce offspring, or in other words, baby plants. All right, and so it tells us that one plant has a genotype of LL with long stem length. So big L, little l, all right, each of these are called alleles. So one plant has a big L allele and a little l allele. And that plant has long stems, all right? So we don't know if that's the mom or dad plant. We just know that one of the plants is going to have big L, little l. And again, I'm not sure if you call plants mom and dad or not, but hopefully you get the point, because I'm just trying to make this simple to understand. And so one plant, one parent is going to have this big L, little l with long stems. And the other is going to have the genotype little l, which corresponds to short stem length, okay? And so basically what's going to happen here is the offspring are going to inherit 1 allele from
mom and one allele for dad. So let's say that the long stem plant, let's say that that's the mom plant, all right? So let's put mom up here on the Punnett square, all right? So mom has one big L allele and one little L allele, all right? And so let's say that the dad plant is the short stem plant, all right? So the dad plant is going to contribute one little L and another little L, all right? So all you have to do here is just fill out all the different combinations here, all right? So what I mean by that is, let's fill this chart out. So we've got a big L right here. It could get big L, one allele, big L allele from mom, and one little L allele from dad. Another combination could be one big L from mom and one little L from dad. And then another combination would be one little allele from mom, because remember, mom has one big L and one little L, and the little L from dad. And then mom also can contribute this little L, and dad can contribute this little L. So if you just fill out the chart here, these are all the different combinations. And we see that when we look at the offspring here, all right, there's a 50% chance that the offspring's going to inherit one big L from the mom and one little L from the dad. All right, because we see that there are 2 cases where that can result. All right, 2 out of these 4 cases are going to have a big L and a little L. The other 2 out of the 4 cases are going to have a little L and a little L. All right, so the result is D, 50% big L, little L, 50% little L, little L. Brown eye color is a dominant trait, whereas blue eye color is a recessive trait. A combination of 2 dominant alleles results in offspring with brown eyes. A combination of a dominant allele and a recessive allele results in offspring with brown eyes. However, a combination of 2 recessive alleles results in offspring with blue eyes. The letter capital B is used to represent a dominant allele, whereas the letter lowercase b is used to represent a recessive allele. One parent's alleles are seen on the left-hand side of the square, and the other parent's alleles are seen on top of the square. The genotypes of the offspring are missing from the boxes below. Please fill in the missing allele combinations below and determine what percentage of the offspring will have brown eye color and what percentage will have blue eye color. And we see A, B, C, and D answer choices. So first, I'd like you to fill out this square, and then and obviously you can't really fill it out, so maybe you can draw a little square like this out on a piece of paper and try to fill it in that way. Whatever works for you. And then pick, is it A, B, C, or D? What percentage will have brown eye color and what percentage will have blue eye color? So that will be a good time for you to pause the video. Try to figure this one out. Take all the time in the world that you need. And as always, if you get stuck, don't worry about it. So let's have you try this now. Okay, so let's talk about this here. So before we go any further here, let's go over how to fill in the Punnett square here. So basically, we just want to fill in the combinations here, and you usually want to write the uppercase letter first here. So I don't know, maybe this is like the mom parent and this is the dad, or vice versa. But anyway, we're going to take one big B from the top here, and this little b over here on the left, we're going to plug that in here. All right, so for this allele, we're going to put the big B first, and we see over here we've got this little b allele, so we just fill it in right here. Okay. All right, now we're going to take this big B allele and drop it in right here, and we're going to combine it with this little allele over here. And then we're going to take this big B allele and we're going to write it combined with this little allele over here. Okay, so we see that there's 4 different possible combination of the alleles. All right, and now we have to decide the eye color. So if you got this far, then good job so far. If not, hopefully you're starting to see how to fill out these Punnett squares. All right, at the very least. Now, let's look at the different combinations here. All right, so it tells us here that big B represents the dominant allele, whereas little b is used to represent the recessive allele. So it tells us that a combination of a dominant allele and a recessive allele is going to result in offspring with brown eyes. So the dominant allele is big B. The recessive allele is this little b right here. And if we combine one dominant allele with one recessive allele, the offspring will have brown eyes. Now, in all 4 of the different combinations of alleles, that we see down here, they all have one big B allele and one little b allele. So actually in this case here, it's going to be 100% brown eyes and 0 blue eyes. So C is the correct answer for this question. Okay, so the next question here, the text is exactly the same, so I'm not going to reread it. If you watch the last question, then this text is exactly the same. All right, so the difference now is in the allele combination. So this time one parent has the combination of big B, little b, and the other parent also has the combination of a big B and a little b. So I'd like you to first start by filling in this chart, and obviously, again, you won't be able to do this. You can't write on the screen, so maybe if you have a sheet of paper handy, maybe just draw a square out like this. However you want to do it, whatever works for you, start by filling in this chart, or at least thinking about how it will be filled in. And then I want you to determine what percentage of the offspring will have brown eyes and what percentage will have blue eyes. So now would be a good time to pause the video, try to figure this out, and then when you're ready, we'll go over the answer. Okay, so let's start by filling this in here. So one parent is going to contribute a big B, and that would combine with this parent's big B. All right, and now like I said before, you usually want to write the dominant allele first. So in this case, we have the combination of big B, little b. All right, so now what about this square here? So the combination in this square is going to be a big B from this parent and the little b from this parent. Now for this square right here, we want to do a little b from this parent and a little b from this parent over here. Okay, so hopefully you at least got this far. All right, and maybe you, when you did the combination for this box, for example, maybe you wrote it like this: little b, big B. And if you did that, then like technically you have the right combination, but just know that usually we write the capital letter first. So just keep that in mind just in case you get confused on your test. But anyway, let's talk about the different percentages here. So what combinations are going to result in brown eyes? Well, it really kind of tells us up here. All right, so brown eyes would be big B, big B, right? The two dominant alleles will result in brown eyes, but also the combination of a dominant allele and a recessive allele. So also the combination of big B, little b. All right, so if the offspring has the combination big B, they'll have brown eyes, but also if they have a big B and a little b, they're also going to have brown eyes. All right, so what about blue eyes? So for blue eyes, it tells us up here, a combination of two recessive alleles results in offspring with blue eyes. So the recessive allele is represented by the little b. So if the offspring has the combination of little b, that is going to represent blue eyes. Okay, so let's count up what we have down here. So for this offspring right here, they've got big B, that would be brown eyes. For this offspring right here, big B, little b, that's going to be brown eyes. For this offspring down here, it's going to be big B, little b, that's also brown eyes. So this one here, big little b, that is blue eyes. So basically, it looks like 3 out of the 4 are going to, all right, so or would be 3 out of the 4 here are going to be brown eyes. So 3 out of 4 is the same as 75%. All right, whereas out of these 4 cases right here, only 1 out of the 4 cases results in the blue eyes, the little b. And 1/4 as a fraction is equal to 25 as a percent, all right? And if you have trouble remembering these, I mean, you can always use your calculator, but I like to think about money. So whenever you see this 4 down here in the denominator, all right, just think about money. So if you've got 1/4, imagine if you've got 1/4, that's 25 cents or 25%, all right? If you've got, 2 quarters, right? If you see 2 over 4, well, just think about quarters. 2 quarters is 50 cents, all right? And if you've got 3 over 4, think about, well, hey, if I have 3 quarters, that's 75. And 4 out of 4, if you have 4 quarters, that gives you $1. So 4 out of 4 would be equal to 1. All right, or in this case, 100%. All right, so that's just kind of like sometimes when you have to remember these, converting these fractions into percents, you can just kind of think about quarters. And if that just confused you more, then don't worry about it. You can also use a calculator, or you could just kind of memorize it. But basically, 3 out of 4 are going to have brown eyes, or 75%. So B is the correct answer here. All right, so hopefully this makes sense. Okay, in this case, note that one parent has 2 little b alleles, and the other parent has a big B and a little b. So this time what I'd like you to do is reread this if you need to, but the text is the same as the previous questions. So basically, just fill out this chart, or at least imagine how you would fill this out. Maybe fill it out on a sheet of paper, and then pick which percentage have brown eye color and which percentage have blue eye color. So let me give you a chance to try this question out. Like I said, take all the time you need to, and when you're ready, go over the answer. Okay, so let's fill the chart out here. So in this case, all right, the parent over here is going to put forward a big B, which would combine with this little b right here. All right, so to fill out this chart, this parent puts in a big B. All right, this parent is going to put in this little b. All right, so we're just filling out all the different combinations here. So here we've got little b combining with a little b. In this case, we've got a little b combining with the other little b. All right, I like to make things simple as possible. I believe that simple is better in most cases. So anyway, in this case, the brown eye color is going to be big B, little b. All right, because it says, again, up here it tells us that a combination of a dominant allele and a recessive allele results in offspring with brown eyes. Here's your dominant allele, here's your recessive allele. They're going to combine for the brown eye color. All right, now what about the blue? Well, the blue is going to be the combination of a little b and a little b, because it tells us that a combination of 2 recessive alleles results in offspring with blue eyes. And it tells us that the little b represents recessive alleles. All right, so this is what we've got here. It looks like 2 out of the 4, all right, combinations are going to have brown. All right, because we have big B, little b, big B, little b. So 2 out of the 4 are going to have brown eyes. And then we see little b, and 2 out of the 4 also would have blue eyes. So that means that 50% brown eyes, 50% blue eyes. All right, so A is the correct answer here.
The following question is the Champions Challenge question for the video here. So the Champions Challenge, if you're new to my channel, first of all, welcome. Let me explain how it works. So for each of my videos for the past couple months, I've been picking out what, in my opinion, is the hardest question in the video, and I've been calling it the Champions Challenge question. So this question coming up here is, in my opinion, the hardest in this video. And so if you want a challenge, you can go ahead and try this question here. And whether you get it right or wrong, we don't really care right now. It's just for the sake of learning and for practice. So don't feel bad if you struggle with this question. And if you think another question was harder than this one, let me know down below. Newton's second law of motion states that the acceleration of an object depends on both the mass of the object and the force acting on it. Which statement describes a conclusion that can be reached from this law? Is it A, doubling the mass decreases the force by half when the object's acceleration is held constant? B, decreasing the force by half doubles the acceleration when the object's mass is held constant? C, doubling the mass doubles the force when the object's acceleration is held constant? Or is it D, doubling the mass decreases the force by half when the object's acceleration is held constant? So now would be a good time to pause the video, try to figure this out, give it your best shot, and then when you're ready, we'll go over how to do the question. Okay, so these questions here can be tricky because there's not just one way to do them. There's different approaches, and the approach that I like to teach is to just look at each statement here and look at the data in the chart, and you're going to have to just see if each statement is true or false. So let's do this for A. So A says doubling the mass decreases the force by half when the object's acceleration is held constant. Okay, so what we want to do here is let's pick out 2 cases where the acceleration is the same to get us started off here. Okay, when it says acceleration is held constant, what you need to do is pick out 2 cases here where the acceleration is the same.
So we could look at the first two right here, because the acceleration in both of these cases here, the acceleration is 2. Okay. And we also want to look at a case where the mass has been doubled. Okay, so in the first case right here, let me call this case 1. Let me call this case 2. So if we compare the mass in case 1 to case 2, we see that the mass is doubled because 5 times 2 is 10. And the acceleration is constant. All right. So what we want to do is when we look at this case 1 and case 2, we see that the mass is doubled. All right. We see that the force, when comparing case 1 and case 2, we see that the force also doubles. So the statement says doubling the mass decreases the force by half when the object's acceleration is held constant. Well, that's simply not what we see here, right? Because when we find a case where the acceleration is held constant and we double the mass, right? 5 to 10 means doubling the mass. The force also doubles, all right? So alternatively, you could have compared these two cases right here because, hey, if we look at, let me call this case 3, and let me call this case 4, all right? So we've got case 1, case 2, case 3, and case 4. And when I say case, I mean everything here. So for example, case 3 would be 10, 4, and 40. Case 4 would be 5, 4, and 20. All right, so if we look at cases 3 and 4, we see that the acceleration is the same. All right, and if we want to look for a case now where we want to look for an example of the mass doubling. So from case 4 to case 3, we see that the mass doubles because in case 4 it's 5, in case 3 it's 10. All right, so when the mass doubles, we see that the force also doubles. All right, note that the force is 20 in case 4, and when the mass doubles, right between case 4 and case 3, we see that in case 3 it's double. The force is also double. All right, so there's two different ways to look at this, but either way, we don't see the mass decreasing by half. Okay, so now for case B, it says decreasing the force by half doubles the acceleration when the mass is held constant. So we're going to want to compare either case 1 and case 4 or compare case 2 and case 3. Because in case 1 and 4, the mass is the same. And in case 2 and 3, the mass is also the same. So it doesn't really matter which one you pick. You just have to check if B is true or false, you need to start by finding two cases where the mass is the same. So let's look at 2 and 3 here. Now, decreasing the force by half doubles the acceleration. So we want to look at the force in case 2 and 3, and we see that in case 3 it's 40, but in case 2 it's 20. All right, so effectively we see that the force has been cut in half when we look at case 3 compared to case 2. So how does the acceleration change? Well, in case 2, the acceleration is 2. All right, so it looks like when we held the mass constant and we cut the force in half, the acceleration was also cut in half. All right, alternatively, you could have looked at cases 1 and cases 4, all right, and you could have seen that in case 4, the force was 20. In case 1, the force was 10. So when we cut the force in half, what happens to the acceleration? Well, we see that the acceleration was also cut in half because in case 4, the acceleration is 4 versus case 1 where the acceleration is 2. So B is false. Okay, what about answer choice C here? Doubling the mass doubles the force when the object's acceleration is held constant. Okay, so the object's acceleration is held constant. So the two cases where the object's acceleration are constant, we'd want to compare case 1 to case 2 or case 3 to case 4 because in case 1 and 2, the acceleration is 2 in each case, and in case 3 and 4, the acceleration is 4 in both cases. All right, so it says doubling the mass doubles the force. So let's look at case 1 and case 2 here because in case 1, the mass is 5, in case 2, the mass is double. So what happened to the force if we compare 1 to 2? Well, in example 1, it's 10. In example 2, it's 20. So it looks like when the mass was doubled and the acceleration was held constant, the force also doubles, okay? So C is the correct answer here. All right, now let me show you kind of a faster way to think about this. All right, so if you want to kind of speed run these kinds of questions on the test, it's a little more tricky, but you just have to remember this formula here.
All right, force equals m times a. Okay, and so you could really just kind of pick numbers here and plug numbers in here. So let me plug numbers into your calculator. So let me show you what I mean here. So a, doubling the mass decreases the force by half when the acceleration is held constant. So let's just make up some random numbers here. All right, let's say for m, let's say m is 10. All right, let's say a is 4. And you would just make these numbers up to kind of get a base case here. So 10, so if mass is 10, acceleration is 4. 10 times 4 is going to be 40. All right, so this is going to be kind of my base case that I'm going to cater everything to. All right, so A says doubling the mass decreases the force by half when the acceleration is held constant. So all I'd want to do is I want to keep the acceleration the same. So the acceleration would be 4. And what I want to do is double the mass. So if I made 10 my mass, what I want to do is double it. So doubling that would be 20. Now what is 20 times 4? Okay, 20 times 4 is 80. Okay. So is it true that when I held the acceleration constant and I doubled the mass, did the force decrease by half? No, it didn't. All right, so we would know A was false. All right, so now how would you do this with B? B says decreasing the force by half doubles the acceleration when the object's mass is held constant. So in this time we want to keep the mass the exact same. All right, because it says the mass is held constant. And this time it says decreasing the force by half. So if the force in my base case was 40, then decreasing that by half would be 20. And so in this case, for the acceleration, all right, we don't know what the acceleration is yet. That's what we want to figure out here. So 20 equals 10 times A. I divide by 10 on both sides to get the A by itself. All right, so 20 divided by 10 is 2. So 2 would equal A. So let's see, is B true or false based off of the formula? It says decreasing the force by half doubles the acceleration when the object's mass is held constant. So if in my base case here the acceleration was 4, and then what I did was I decreased the force by half and held the mass constant, the acceleration ended up being 2. So the acceleration was cut in half here. All right, the acceleration did not double. So B would also be false. All right. So then for C, it says doubling the mass doubles the force when the acceleration is held constant. So in this case, what we want to do is let's double the mass. So if I made 10 my mass, this time doubling it would be 20. We hold the acceleration constant, so this is still going to be 4. 20 times 4 is 80. All right, so we see that when I double the mass, we see that my force also doubled. Okay, when the acceleration is held constant. So this method, I think, is, if you understand what you're doing, I think it's faster than just kind of using the table. But, if you're not super confident in your math and you're not super confident that you know what you're doing using this formula here, then just kind of stick to comparing the cases in the chart here. And it's just kind of tedious, but once you practice a couple examples, hopefully this will make a little more sense. I know I have another example of this in my GED Science Practice Test Part 2 video. If I remember, I'll link it down below. I think it's the first question in that video. All right, but these questions are just kind of tedious. All right, but hopefully this makes sense. So I've given you 2 ways to do this here. You just have to kind of choose your own adventure with these questions here.